Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Anna Shep, Principal Policy Associate with the Urban Institute. There are so many of you here today. Thank you for your interest in the Equity Resources Navigator and for taking time out of your day to be here with us. Before we get into our agenda, a few quick housekeeping notes for your awareness. Today's event is being recorded. The recording will be posted and available online afterwards. You can hide captions or adjust settings with the captions button. Speaker biographies and related materials are available online. All attendees are muted, but you're welcome and encouraged to type your questions or comments in the Q&A box at any time. Please engage with us using #LiveAtUrban. Before signing off at our event, please take a minute to complete a short survey. Moving into our agenda, during this webinar, we'll do a live demonstration of the Equity Resources Navigator and hear from leaders at GARE and NLC about what trends and opportunities they see for advancing equity and racial equity across their networks, and hear from local equity leaders who are doing this work every day in places across the US. Before we jump in, I want to briefly share the background on why and how we developed this exciting new resource for equity practitioners in local government. Across the country, local officials across all functions of government, from equity offices to procurement, budgeting, communications, commerce, offices of sustainability, and more, are developing, implementing, and iterating on all types of equity interventions and actively seeking resources that help them take informed actions that embed all types of equity in internal and external activities. There are a myriad of resources out there, so it often takes local government leaders a lot of time to search for and sift through all that is out there. And that leaves questions about how to know what will be most relevant and applicable to your work. So in light of this, Urban identified the need for a central open access repository for a robust but curated library of resources that local governing entities can use throughout the various phases of the equity continuum. And so the idea for the Equity Resources Navigator was born. To inform the development of the Navigator, which has been a 2-year process starting in 2022, we spoke with key stakeholders, such as local officials from various jurisdictions, as well as our partners at GARE. We drew from Urban's research and other literature, created a grounding framework and corresponding focus areas in partnership with GARE, compiled and organized relevant resources, and engaged various local officials and government staff, some of whom you'll hear from today, to test the Navigator user experience. We thank all of those who helped make the Navigator what it is. A very special thank you to our wonderful partners at GARE, whose thoughtful feedback helped ensure we were including resources that supported a range of government functions, as well as a range of phases along the equity continuum. And with that, I'd like to turn it to Kathy Albisa to say a few words before we jump into our first panel.
Hello, everyone. Before the end of this introduction, you'll figure out that the team at Urban and the team at GARE really, really like each other. So thank you so very much to Urban Institute for inviting us here and for inviting GARE into a very special partnership. I particularly want to thank the Office of Race and Racial Equity Research, because I know that doing racial equity work, whether it's in government, whether it's in a powerful think tank like Urban, in a large or small or medium nonprofit, in your own neighborhood, anywhere really, doing racial equity work is hard. I'm sure all of you who are doing this work right now are nodding, or at least telling yourselves inside your head, yes, it is. It is very hard because systemic racism is one of the most profound, complex, and vexing problems we have in our nation. And your office at Urban has picked up this important burden and has committed to moving forward, whether we are facing headwinds or tailwinds, because we need to move forward regardless of the external context. And today we're going to be talking about tailwinds and how we make this hard work a little easier and more effective. Specifically, I want to talk about R&R. Yes, R&R. We all need R&R, but I am not talking about the movement's recent fascination with with rest as a revolutionary concept. I'm talking about a different R&R, the kind that undergirds and makes possible all our efforts. Resources and relationships. This project represents the best of both. But I'm going to be honest about how we got here. When we at GARE heard Urban was putting together a resource bank of racial equity tools, the first thing we said to ourselves is this a problem? Who are these people? And are they doing racial equity light? Spoiler alert, it was not a problem. What we learned was there was a group of people at Urban deeply committed to racial equity with a formidable set of skills. What we learned is that their uphill battle is just as hard as ours, but it can be less difficult, of course, when we're climbing uphill together. And that's when I realized that how we got here actually involved a lot of people who are not in this room. If we're honest with ourselves, generations of people. But I want to bring us back in this intro just for a moment to 2020 and the uprising, and why this launch is an important reminder that movements matter. The 2020 uprising was a product of post-Ferguson organizing by Movement for Black Lives. We are still living in the wake of that uprising, and our institutions have changed in the wake. Despite the backlash, despite the political and legal attacks, despite the smear campaigns, which I know you've all seen and followed against racial equity work, the wake of that uprising is being felt. We see it in the 2022 opening and success of the Office of Race and Racial Equity Research at Urban. That is why this office is a child of the racial justice movement in the best of all possible ways. And this resource hub we're sharing today is as well. So long as we can support offices like this at Urban and tools like the one launched today, we are meeting our collective obligation to our movement, and I am honored to partner with this team. All of us play different roles in advancing racial equity, and this team at Urban is here to offer and curate the second R, resources. And now they're doing that work together with GARE. We're building next level frameworks together. We're informing each other's platforms. We're offering each other skills and experience, as well as our solidarity and friendship in this work. Because this work does bring people together, even though it does sometimes mean we argue, but it brings people together. And if you are here today, I want you to know that it's our collective relationship with you that binds us in this partnership, because you are the ones doing the work on the ground where it really matters. Strong relationships bring forth the best of resources. Resources allow us to deepen our work, and in turn, through that, deepen our relationships. This cycle of relationships bringing forth resources that fuel more relationships and bring forth more resources is how we build a movement for racial equity in government. This Navigator and Resource Hub that we are launching today, which seeks to make the best of what is available out there to all of you, will accelerate this cycle. It's a valuable offering to our field. So I end this remarks as I began, thanking Urban, thanking all of you, because as today will demonstrate, together, despite the growing storm and headwinds, we will not be deterred. We will advance this work until it is no longer the case that race predicts the life outcomes of our children in this country. And we will not be deterred until we have the multiracial democracy we all deserve. So thank you for allowing me to open this up. It is a privilege. And with that, I have the honor of welcoming Selena Barrios, our moderator, for the next conversation.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Thank you for grounding us in what matters here and connecting us with each other, because that's really why we're here today, is to connect with each other and to make sure we can continue to learn from all the innovation and all of the great work happening on the ground. I want to welcome Beverly Scurry, Program Director of the Office of Race and Equity. Sorry, I'm going to give you my title, Beverly. The Program Director of Race, Equity, and Leadership at the National League of Cities. It is such a pleasure and privilege to be here with both of you today. I wanted to share that prior to joining the Urban Institute, I served as Chief Equity Officer for the City of Boston as we were reeling from the devastating impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. And like many municipalities and local leaders at the time, we faced the challenge of responding to the immediate crisis while also knowing that this was a moment that we could design for a better future, and we could do things differently. And so there was this need of the immediate and also the need to be planful and intentional with the resources that we were going to be receiving. I knew at the time there was a lot of great information out there. I knew there were amazing people out there, and I felt like it was just beyond my grasp. I felt like I just didn't have the time or the bandwidth to really connect and learn while we were having to make those real-time decisions. And so that's really why we joined forces with the GARE network and the National League of Cities to figure out how we can take some of the information that's out there and make it more accessible to you all. So in this conversation, we're going to talk more about what's going on in the field of equity at the local government level right now, and what these incredible organizations are doing to support all of you, and what the role of the navigator in all of that. So to kick us off, Beverly, could you please start by telling us a little bit more about the work that NLC is doing to support your membership on the ground as they embark on racial equity work? And how would you define your organization's role in the broader field?
Yeah. Well, first I'd like to say just thank you to you, Selena, and Kathy for bringing me into the relationship that you all are building around this navigator tool. Very happy to be here and to also share the resources that NLC has. So thank you for this opportunity. As far as the work that NLC is doing, we're happy that we've been really intentional about taking our network members and beyond really through this foundational arc of learning through various methods. We've had partnerships with cities across the country. We've had cohorts that we've worked with multiple cities in them. We've designed as well courses for individuals that they can go through. So we've been really fortunate to also have a great partner in GARE, whose content that you all have been developing has greatly benefited the curriculum that we've developed as well for the members that go through our various learning opportunities. So we at NLC, we offer 4 really foundational learning opportunities that walk our audiences through getting started with advancing racial equity, especially for municipal leaders and government staff. These learning opportunities that we've developed also cover not just, getting started, but how to communicate effectively about race and equity, visualizing a racially equitable future, and systems change for racial equity. And so we also have our Real Council that has about 80 members that advises our team. And we work really closely with our council leadership to establish annual goals. And we also survey our members regularly. We want to stay abreast of what they need in the racial equity space. And we want to meet those needs through various opportunities, like at our Real Council meetings and our annual conferences. Our team also has a great privilege of working closely with other teams at NLC to help bring a racial equity lens to their topic-specific work, such as our Justice Initiatives team, our Economic Opportunity and Financial Empowerment team, our Sustainability and Innovation team. We even have an Entrepreneurship and Economic Development team. And so these collaborative efforts that we have with other teams at NLC really allow us to embed the foundational racial equity knowledge and skills and practical applications with their city cohorts that they work with within their programming to bring, our resources to a wider audience beyond our real network, and to bring their resources and opportunities to our real network. So it's a vice versa relationship that we have with a lot of the teams at NLC. And as far as the broader field of racial equity, we really like to focus on the L in real. So race, equity, and leadership. We love to say we like to focus on the L, growing and encouraging leaders in this field, especially local elected officials. We feel is really important to systemic change. We aim to share foundational racial equity knowledge and skills so that leaders can really change and create and adopt sustainable and equitable policy practices and procedures that benefit everybody in their communities and really help to move the needle towards more equitable outcomes.
Thank you so much, Beverly. I really appreciate all the work you're doing, and especially how you work across the various initiatives within NLC to embed racial equity and equity in general, because we know that it doesn't work when we're off to the side and when we're siloed from the business of the organization or the institution. Kathy, could you share a little more about the work that GARE is doing in this space and how you define your organization's role in the broader field?
Sure, and before I do that, even though we, give a lot of admiration to the Urban team, I do want to acknowledge that the Real team has been a great partner to GARE for actually quite a number of years, and thank you for that and helping us extend our reach and really support on, really focus on elected officials who need to really buy in. So with that, for those who don't know, GARE is the government network focused exclusively on racial equity and long-term transformative change. It stands for Government Alliance on Race and Equity. So we work to support what we call our constituents, and those constituents are racial equity practitioners in government. I assume many of you here today. And we support our constituents change our members. Our members are the jurisdictions, but we know that they come to us because they're looking for organizational change strategies to govern differently. Our goal is systemic change so that all aspects of government, all of it, policy, practice, culture, are designed in ways that close racial equity gaps while strengthening systems for everyone. People might be familiar with the term. We call it targeted universalism, which just means targeting pernicious racial equity gaps by addressing the deepest problem, improving things for all communities. That is the general model. We offer tools and resources. Some of them will be on the Navigator. Glad everyone's going to get to see them. Monthly programming, learning, organizational change model, which I won't get into detail, but if you want to come to a GARE info session, all are welcome. But most importantly, we offer community, a community of practitioners that support and learn from each other, that exchange and innovate together. And by bringing them together in relationship, we continue to try to build a movement, one that is an important wing of the racial justice movement, of the larger movement, really focused on making sustainable change in our most important institution, government. So yes, we have cohorts, infrastructure this year, housing working group, but really just if you come in a GARE, come to be part of a community that is committed to learning, committed to organizing, committed to visioning together. And that includes for us and our community, all our partners here. So thank you very much for the question.
Thank you, Kathy, and really thank you both for the work that you've been doing for years to support local leaders in advancing good public policy and rooted in equity. So I want to hear a little bit more. You all have get to speak to your members that are located throughout the country in cities of different sizes, in different political spaces. And I want to hear a little bit more. Just let me be a fly on the wall in the conversations you've been having, and what kind of themes are you seeing emerge from your conversations with different localities, and what kind of support are people asking for the most? And we'll go over to you, Beverly.
Yeah. So I'll actually talk a little bit about an external consulting group that Real worked with earlier this year. Well, it started last year, called Higher Ed Insight. We worked with them to conduct an environmental scan of the racial equity field and did some surveying of our partners and members. And so that scan identified some what they called indicators of promise and opportunities in the field that we've been working to incorporate into our programming. And so some of the indicators of promise that they talked about was in the scan that they did was the things that we're seeing that is helping advance racial equity, starting with the 2 White House executive orders on racial equity that were instrumental in integrating racial equity into legislation like the American Rescue Act plan. And NLC was really committed to an equitable allocation of ARPA funds to municipal governments, having successfully advocated for big cities and, helping to determine a formula for how those cities would receive grant monies. So those executive orders have really gone a long way in helping advance racial equity for local government across the country. We also saw in that governmental scan that we did, or racial equity scan, that we're seeing a continued racial equity investment from funders, which is really great to hear. Funders like the Cleveland Foundation, W.K. Kellogg Foundation, and different funder initiatives, even like RWJF's Evidence for Action and the Southern Communities Initiative. And we're also found in that scan that states continue to promote and advance racial equity by embedding equity in their rulemaking requirements and laws being passed. Municipalities are continuing to develop racial equity plans, and even, some members of the House and Senate continue to include equity in their policy agenda. So it was really great to be able to identify in the field all of these great things that are continuing to happen. And then out of that evaluation that we did, there were some opportunities in which we can have a greater impact at NLC on the members that we have in our network and beyond. Some of those things include creating opportunities for more open and constructive dialogue. We heard a lot about cities wanting to have these conversations with each other, with their communities, with stakeholders, with elected officials. And so we also heard they want assistance in navigating perceived or real legal constraints that they're facing. And they want support with training, with guidance on issues like preemptions and maybe even lawsuits that come up. We also saw in that environmental scan that research in the field is needed. And so we're building our research agenda with the hope to really determine the impact of some of the anti-racial equity efforts that we're seeing, and understanding the impact of equitable policies, practices, and procedures at the population level that different municipalities are passing. We hope that the case studies and that the work that's being done in different municipalities having that impact at the population level. And so we want to be a part of studying that. We also want to be a part of bridging the alignment between elected leaders and local government staff. Sometimes there's a disconnect in getting everyone on the same page. And so we're hearing that there needs to be, that cities are wanting alignment there as well. And then highlighting funding opportunities. We're hearing from cities that they want to know where the funding is. And so we're definitely working with a lot of our different teams around, with housing and economic opportunity to make sure we're putting out all of that information to our network when funding opportunities come up. We're also looking into opportunities where we can help embed more racial equity leaders in local government, especially for small to mid-sized cities that are saying they would like more assistance because, you know, maybe they can't have equity officers or offices of racial equity. So how are we looking to help small to mid-sized cities as well? And then from our Real Council, you know, we've heard that they are really interested in solutions and resource-based workshops and information specifically on topics like housing, economic development, and community engagement. So we're hoping to continue to respond to those needs and wants that we found in that environmental scan.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Beverly. And I really appreciate how you lifted up that the work is continuing and is growing on the ground and at the state level. I think that's a narrative that people don't hear a lot, and it's really important to lift up. And cities have always been where the rubber meets the road and the level of government that's closest to the people. And so I think that cities are continuing to prioritize ensuring a more equitable future that can be shared by all their residents. I'm really glad that you're seeing that. Kathy, how does what Beverly shared line up with what you're hearing? And is there anything you'd add to what people are saying that they need or what people are saying they're facing on the ground?
Yeah, I was thinking of when I saw the question more in 3 broad buckets, and I am looking at some of your questions just for you all to know the tool is coming, patient. There is something I have for you on evaluation in terms of another question that is also coming. But in terms of trends, because you asked a question in terms of trends, the trends mirror what we're seeing more broadly in the country, right? A lot of polarity. It's true that there's these enormous federal opportunities. The commitment, at least behind the scenes, remains pretty strong. And the agencies many people in the agencies are all in. But we're still seeing a lot of need for support in geographies where racial equity is under attack. So some places are more innovative, bolder than ever, and other places are facing terrible situations, right? Dismantling offices, closing down budgets, and we need to give them a different set of tools. So, for example, we launched a racial equity and law initiative in partnership with the Lawyers Committee for Civil and Civil Rights Under Law for our members who need extra legal counsel support, memos, research, or even potentially litigation support. And we have to figure out how to protect the gains we've made, because that's why they're coming after them. And we are trying to develop an organizing narrative and legal strategy to support people facing these bigger threats. That is definitely a trend, an unfortunate but real trend. At the same time, the other 2 trends are completely opposite, right? The second trend is we're getting a lot of questions in our network survey and our conversations. How do we build deeper tools, right? Some that have subject matter expertise built in, that they're really adapted and tailored for what particular agencies are doing. How do we support the more experienced practitioners who are ready to innovate and take things to the next level? And that's where one of the things we're working on, which should be out next year, is an evaluation framework for jurisdictions to assess whether they're actually making systemic change. Not programmatic change and this program or that program, super important, but systemic change. Is your jurisdiction changing in a long-term sustainable way towards racial equity? And we're hoping that that assessment framework will be out next year. And we're hoping to partner with Urban in that whole conversation as well, of course. But that is one big trend, going deeper, more tailored. There's lots of people out there doing this a long time now, and they need support too. The third trend is about absorption. I call it the absorption problem. After the uprising, there were so many more people that entered the field, right? There was a window of opportunity and a lot of support. And what we're getting is, how do we upskill all these people? How do we bring them into this community? How do they learn what other people have been doing for decades? And despite the contraction, there are still so many more new practitioners out there than experienced ones. So that's the third trend and challenge. And we're looking at how do we figure out strategies to a larger scale. It's really wonderful to have hands-on one-on-one training TA for everyone, but with so many people, we have 14,000 people just on our online community. We're developing things like self-paced online training around our basic tools and really trying to figure out how to create more connectivity, practitioner to practitioner, so that it's an each one teach one approach, because there are just so many more people part of our field right now. And that's a wonderful thing. But that is the third trend. How do you figure out strategies that get larger number of people started the right way? So I don't know if that's the general direction, but those are the three things that I've been seeing.
Yeah, that's great. And it is important to note that, I mean, I think you've always been about meeting people where they are and getting people to a place together. And so there is no monolith when we're talking about racial equity work on the ground, and really appreciate the work that you're doing to support people in whatever kind of context they're in. This context and staging was something we talked a lot about when we were thinking about what kind of how do we organize the resources we're going to put together? Like, what are the key areas that anyone in government should be thinking about? And I know that in our conversations, you mentioned a lot, Kathy, that advancing equity is not the job of one office or team. It's not just for the chief equity officer. And as you mentioned, Beverly, not every city or locality has a chief equity office or officer. So Kathy, can you tell us more about, what went into the thinking behind what we included in the Navigator, like the categories that we felt are important to embedding equity at the local level, and how that was informed by the work that you've been doing for so long as part of the GARE network?
We wanted to make sure to design the Navigator in a way that moved people towards not one-offs, right? Not a programmatic outcome, not a one-off, but an understanding that racial equity requires systemic change. In some fields, systemic racism is referred to as a wicked problem, which is not a reference to its moral or immoral nature, though it is immoral, but that's not what that means. It means it's a complex, difficult to solve problem that's pervasive and self-generating. If you think about how systemic racism works, it's like whack-a-mole. You get it here and it pops up there. If you think about our history, you abolish chattel slavery and then you get Jim Crow, and you abolish Jim Crow and then you get mass incarceration. It's a problem that keeps replicating itself. And that's why it needs generative solutions that are systemic, right? A way of doing things, not one magic bullet. So we want to point people in that direction. Racial equity work is a process of a jurisdiction or an organization changing itself, educating and organizing so many people in government that it becomes the new normal. It can't come from above. It can't come from below only. It has to come from above and below. It can't come from some agencies and not others. It has to be across government if it is to be transformation and ultimately stick. It simultaneously has to be methodical and thoughtful because you're building long-term outcomes, but you also have to be adaptable to ongoing changes in the environment. So fundamentally, it's about changing the questions we ask. Things like, sometimes we ask, how many do we reach and how much does it cost? To, are we closing gaps and is anyone better off? So we tried to design the Navigator to encourage the through line. Whether you're doing housing, whether you're doing health, it doesn't matter. You're still aligned and pulling the jurisdiction in the same direction, right? Building a culture, a policy, and a practice that applies to everything. Because if government has a historical role in producing the inequities, it needs a wholesale change to change them.
Really well said, Kathy. And I really appreciated how you pushed this idea that it's not something that is complete, right? It's not like we did this one thing and we're done, right? But that no matter where you are, you can always do more, or no matter even if you're starting from scratch, there's always something that you can do, even, you know, one agency at a time or one program at a time. So it needs to be this holistic approach, but there's something in this tool for everybody, no matter where you are. Beverly, we've heard, and I know some of the questions we've received in the chat reference this, that people are looking for best practices and lessons learned from other cities. And I know you're in the process of updating your repository to include some of these case studies, many of which we included in our Navigator as well. Can you tell us more about how NLC is lifting up the work that cities are doing on the ground and how you're hoping to facilitate the connections between cities? I know we're getting a lot of interest in the chat of how do I connect with both of you, but also how do we connect with each other? So can you tell us more about, you know, how you facilitate those connections?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that we're really hearing from cities that we've been working with is, you know, especially those who have already been immersed in racial equity work, they're wanting to know, like, you know, what is the next step? Who is doing the work so that they can learn from who's doing the work and how are they doing the work? And so I think this Navigator tool is really the perfect tool that blends both of those things together. It's the how with different guides and tools and things that allow cities to do racial equity work step by step. And then it's the case studies, who has, you know, tried these things on, who's been successful in their city. So we were really excited to be a part of that, a part of the Navigator and the case studies that we, you know, supplied for the tool. I would say one thing that we do with the cities that we work with is we're trying to embed all of the, you know, case studies of work from other cities, the tools, the guides, the resources into our workshops, so that cities who are doing the work see in real time and get the opportunity to practice in real time some of these guides and things that have been developed. And so it's not, you know, just saying, here's a tool, but if you come to our workshop, this is how the tool is used and so, you know, if anyone wants to get in touch, you know, with NLC, I can share my contact information. I don't know if you all are sending out a follow-up email, but would definitely be able to, you know, send that information. And then, you know, one of the things that we hear from our members that go through our workshops or cohorts is that they stay connected with one another. We're helping our cities build a community of practice with each other, and they stay connected, you know, calling each other, emailing each other, you know, getting together at our annual conferences just to be a sounding board for each other. You know, some of our cities are going through the same thing. And so if they can get and stay connected to other cities who have either developed something that they're interested in or wanting to get input on something that they're working on from another city who's already gone through that process, it's a real community of support that we're helping our cities build with each other. So yeah.
Yes, and we'll make sure to share how to connect with both of your great networks. We have time to take a couple of questions. We've gotten to a few of them just through we had some alignment in the questions, but really wanted to lift up, if you could each, you know, take a minute or so to speak about the smaller and mid-sized cities. What supports are there? It seems like they're in such a different place in terms of resources, and there's a gap that one of our participants is identifying. So how do you build capacity to engage inside and outside at the same time when you're in one of these smaller cities?
Do you want to go, Kathy?
I mean, I will note that actually most of our membership are small and mid-sized cities.
Yeah.
Quite a lot of very small cities. But that doesn't mean it's not a challenge. I mean, let's not pretend that there's a panacea to not having the resources you need. The question, though, becomes, how do you organize to actually, at least within the context that you find yourself in, can get this as a priority, right? Committed as a priority. If there isn't the capacity to have a racial equity office, is there a capacity to pull together a core team from across the city, from the different agencies? Is there enough to at least release somebody for some time to coordinate that core team? Can you learn from what other core teams have done? Can being in relationships with other cities help move the work forward? And are there people in your community that you don't actually need to bring along, but will actually help bring your city along? Like who is the coalition of the willing in your city already that you want to build relationship outside of government? You know, what's the community infrastructure? These are the questions you need to ask. Again, not going to pretend that that makes it easy. As I think my first introduction was, this work is hard. This work is hard, and for a very long time, no one was paying us to do any of it. We had to eke it out where we could. And we should use the opportunities we have to formalize this work, to accelerate it. And as you said, Selena, you meet people where they're at and you don't leave them there. And you take every step, every inch you can. So all I would say is, don't be discouraged by not being able to do it all. Be discouraged by people who don't want to do anything. Because once you get momentum moving, the last thing is, do look for those federal grants. There's a lot in those federal grants. They're not going to last forever. That I've been told, if you really look into it, you can, they can be moved towards building relational infrastructure. For example, there's an EPA grant right now around climate justice to build co-governing models between cities and communities, centering racial equity. That's federal money that you could use, picking any kind of climate justice issue, housing, anything that could build your infrastructure between government and community. So you want to look and be creative and look for those opportunities as well.
Thank you so much, Kathy. And I know we're at time, so we'll make sure to share contact information so we all can stay connected. But we want to make sure that you can see the tool we've been talking about. But I just really want to thank Beverly and Kathy again for your tireless work and for your leadership in this space and for your contributions to the Equity Resource Navigator.
Thank you.
So now I'm gonna introduce our next presenter, the incredible Chitra Balakrishnan from the Office of Race and Equity Research at the Office of Race and Equity at the Urban Institute. And Chitra has really been leading a lot of the finding and connecting the resources and really creating the user experience that you'll all get to, along with our incredible tech team, that you'll all get to learn more about. So thank you so much, Chitra, for your work.
Thanks, Selena, for the very kind introduction. And thank you, Beverly and Kathy, for that insightful panel. As Selena mentioned, my name is Chitra, and today I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Navigator, both why we created it and then how it works. And so I'll be doing a live walkthrough of the Navigator survey so you can see what it's like to use it. And then we'll hold a few minutes of Q&A at the end to answer some of the questions or comments that you might have. Next slide, please. So first off, we'd like to provide some background on why our team created the Navigator. At the beginning of the project, we realized that we couldn't take a one-size-fits-all approach to providing local government officials and staff with the equity tools and resources they needed. And as Kathy and Beverly mentioned during the panel, during their discussion of themes, like we need to assist a broad array of folks. So there are folks who are just beginning to do this work in an informal capacity and who might not have the support from leadership, to other offices and states and larger localities that have been doing this work for several years and already have those robust strategies and frameworks guiding their streams of work all over their offices. And then to everyone else in between that spectrum. And so through conversations with localities and network organizations, we found that because of politics, funding, and a variety of other contextual factors and constraints, these localities were all at very different points along their equity journeys, and we wanted our product to reflect that reality. Second, we wanted resources that would be relevant and tailored to a very wide range of government functions, recognizing that, a communications officer and a data scientist might be following the same team-wide definition of equity, but then have very different considerations for how that work functions in their day-to-day roles. And then finally, we wanted to draw upon the work of our incredible colleagues, both at Urban and at other organizations, and many of whom we're lucky enough to be in the room virtually with today. So we're sharing Zoom space right now with a variety of practitioners, advocates, researchers, and so many more who have already been doing this work to create robust equity tools, resources, guides, case studies, et cetera. And so the main thing we were hearing from localities and network orgs that we spoke to was that staff just often weren't sure where to start looking for resources. Not that they didn't exist. It's just like, as Selena was mentioning, you hop on Google and aren't sure where to go next. And so given all of these factors, we thought the best way to address our priorities was to serve as this navigator. So to provide local government audiences with curated lists of equity tools and resources that are tailored to their needs. And so we pressure tested hundreds of resources over the past year or two through our own criteria, but then also did user testing with a lot of localities, as we mentioned earlier. And those folks provided a lot of feedback on how we can make this navigator more relevant to their needs. Next slide. And so with that context in mind, we can talk a little bit more about what the Navigator does. So one of the primary features of the Navigator is our user survey. And you can fill out this survey, select whatever areas that you might be interested in getting resources for. And then on the left side of the slide here, you can see the example question. So for example, here we're asking about data disaggregation in our data collection analysis section. And then after submitting the survey, you'll get this output of a list of resources that are tailored to your specific responses. And so on the right, you can see a couple example resources that you would get in the data and analysis section. Next slide. And then in addition to the survey, we've also made it possible for you to access the catalog of all the resources in the Navigator, which you can filter by organization, type, area of focus. And so for our launch, we curated a set of 89 resources, but are very interested in continuing to build and improve upon the Navigator. So would welcome now or at another time recommendations for what else we should consider adding. Next slide, please. Thanks. So as I mentioned earlier, government staff in all these different fields have very domain-specific considerations that can impact your equity strategies. And so to address that, we thought we would split up the survey into all these different focus areas that speak to different government functions and priorities. And we know that this is not a comprehensive list of all government functions to which equity can be embedded, but we landed on them through helpful feedback from colleagues at GARE, from what we heard as needs from practitioners, and then we narrowed it down based on just the resources that were out there right now that felt robust that we could recommend to you all. And wanted to dive into a couple of them today. So our internal infrastructure section is about how agencies approach this equity work organization-wide, recognizing that, these institution-wide structures and agreements are very foundational to ensuring success in embedding equity across functions in government. And so we made the questions in this section required for everyone completing the survey to reflect that belief that we had. And then on the slide, you'll also see the 7 other focus areas that you can all select based on your interests. Staff capacity building is about equipping staff to take on this capacity work. And so that includes both internal processes like hiring, retention, but then also more perhaps external facing programmatic work or other work, building staff capacity to do that as well. We have external communications, procurement and grant making, budgeting and financial management, which also includes financing and spending in addition to budgeting. We have data collection and analysis, community engagement, and finally policymaking, both for legislative and administrative policymaking processes. Next slide, please. So how can you use the Navigator? Before we're jumping into the live demo, we wanted to give you a little interactive chance to let us know what you'd like to see next. So we put together 3 example user profiles that we attempted to use to demonstrate all the different ways that government audiences might use this navigator, both different roles, but also different fields or domains. And so our team is going to launch a poll in the chat about now, asking you which of these 3 scenarios that you'd be most interested in us walking through for the navigator. So we ask that you should get a little pop-up on your screen to just vote for the scenario that corresponds to what you're seeing on the slide. And so for scenario A, we have you're a data analyst in a state agency who would like to make your work more reflective of lived experience, but you face constraints in data collection. Scenario B, you're a procurement director of a mid-sized locality and are looking for guidance on equitable procurement. And then scenario C, your agency is in the planning phase for a capital project and you're in charge of public outreach, looking for innovative approaches to community engagement. So we will pause for a little bit to give folks more time to respond to the poll, and we'll check back in a couple moments. And while we were waiting for folks to respond, we can quickly answer a question from one of the Q&A box helpful things that we've received about whether the resource embeds things from GARE or focuses on resources from Urban. And as you'll see, we have a lot of Urban resources, but we've also tried to pull from a variety of folks, GARE, NLC, and a lot of independent organizations, academics, et cetera. But we've just finished the poll. And it looks like, oh, wow, that's a close call between the scenario A and C, but it looks like scenario C wins for today, the community engagement scenario. So we will be walking through the survey as this person in charge of public outreach looking for innovative approaches to community engagement for this capital project. So now I will be screen sharing the live demo of the navigator. All right, you should be able to see the page right now. All right, so this is our homepage for the navigator, which many of you might have already seen. At the top, I just wanted to call attention to our user guide, which we really recommend that folks use or take a look at before they launch the navigator, just because it gives a lot of context for points we covered today, as well as some more guidance on filling out the survey. And so for any of your colleagues or folks that are also interested in looking at the navigator who weren't here today, we definitely recommend that they get caught up by looking at that user guide. And then at the bottom of the page, we have this full resource list where you can see the catalog we were talking about with all the filter options for the first batch of resources that we have in the navigator today. So resource type, focus area, source are different filters. And today, for example, I will filter by National League of Cities. And here you can see all of the case studies that we've pulled from NLC's great repository of racial equity decisions and policies, which we encourage you to check out if you're interested. And so you can see there's a variety of resources beyond those just from Urban, and we're trying to build more upon that. And then finally, in the middle here is the button to take the survey. And before I click on that, I do want to flag that you can read this PDF of the full list of survey questions, which we think that it might be helpful for folks to circulate to others on their team and to prepare answers in advance before they fill out the survey on our platform. We heard during our user testing phase that some folks weren't always sure how to answer the survey questions before they sent it to members of their team, but that it was helpful to do that collaborative and iterative survey completion together. So now I will launch our survey, which is on Qualtrics. And here it is. So at the top, it just walks you through some basic information, and I'll just put some placeholders now because this is an example. But while I'm doing this, I do want to flag that I know that some of the information here, both the contact information and the things you'll answer later in the survey, can be sensitive in nature in folks, and we definitely recognize that and wanted to let you all know that this information throughout the survey will not be shared with folks outside of our research team. And we're really just asking these questions to get a better sense of how people are using the Navigator, where they're coming from, and how we can then use that to make it most responsive to your needs. So here you can also see which focus areas you'd like to receive resources for. And given our scenario today, we're doing the community engagement one. And next is that required internal infrastructure section. And so for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through every single question, but we are happy to talk through any of the specifics either during the Q&A, or we can connect offline. Would be happy to talk more. But I did want to flag these first couple because our team really has understood the importance of having this shared understanding of equity work, and then also centering racial equity as part of that work. And we understand that that's not necessarily the reality of everyone in government, but it is one of the biggest factors in determining whether you can use any of the resources and tools properly in the other sections of the focus area. So it really felt like it was part of our philosophy for how really change happens for folks doing this work. It also asks questions like whether you have formal equity team members, whether you have informal equity team members. I'll just plug in some answers here for the moment, just so I can show you the rest of the survey. And here is the community engagement section. So our questions in this focus area and in several others really align with the way that we think about these localities' equity journeys. And so we envision that they're first setting these goals for equity, as you can see in this first question, as that initial step, and then start to implement these different types of strategies like, partnering before, during, and after engagement, and then making sure that feedback you're getting from the community is then being implemented. So we ask all these implementation questions, and then we also, at the end of many sections, talk about this accountability part. So we're establishing these goals and strategies, and then we're enacting them. And then how do we track whether or not they're meeting those goals and aligning with those strategies? We ask about those things. And then finally, we ask about closing the feedback loop and how do localities course correct when they realize they might not be meeting those targets. So we ask questions about all those things because we really feel that our model that we've talked through a lot with GARE is that this local government work is one of continuous innovation and evolution, and it doesn't just stop with implementing an equity framework and you're done. It's like a constant learning and growth process. So now we're submitting, and this is the output page where you can see all the results. And so at the top here, you have this print feature where you can automatically save this as a PDF. And we recommend this if you want to just get your answers later and don't have to go through the survey again, but also so you can share it with team members. We also sorted all the resources by focus area, have the titles, links, and some descriptions both on what the resource does and how we think it could be helpful to our intended audience. I also want to flag that where possible, we tried to include page numbers for different sections that we thought would be most relevant based on your answers. So we piped in that text. Thanks for our incredible tech team to really customize this for folks who don't have time perhaps to read through an entire report and comb out what's most relevant to them. And then we have our community engagement resources here, and wish I had more time to talk through all these, but do want to point out as one example of a great resource that we think is relevant to a lot of folks, this spectrum of community engagement to ownership. It is a fantastic resource that really outlines what we were talking about earlier about how it's so important to not only just consult communities for input or ask them to inform your work, but to really partner with them and have them lead your work. And so we really have recommended this to a lot of folks and gotten great responses during our user testing, but there's much more that we recommend. And then finally, we invite you to share your feedback on the Navigator in this survey, but we will also drop into the chat our project team email. So if you have any thoughts or questions about any part of the project, we welcome those as well. All right, and that is everything on the live demo. So now we will pause for a couple moments to answer some questions that we've gotten so far. So feel free to type those in the chat. And then while we're answering some questions, we also invite you to answer this poll, both given the information that you've seen in the demo so far, but then also from the first panel. We really want to make sure that post this launch, we continue to be learning from you all about how to best disseminate this resource. So if you have any networks in mind that you think we should reach out to as we update the Navigator, please let us know in this little poll. Or even once the poll closes, feel free to message it in the Q&A. All right. Okay, so one of the questions we have, which I think is really a great question, is do you imagine other users being able to use the Navigator, like faith institutions and community groups, or is it primarily focused to cities? Yeah, that is a fantastic question. I think we were, in the beginning of our project, we're very much trying to get to the needs of localities, but we even at the time, we interviewed folks at other, community nonprofits, like affordable housing groups, who really do play such a vital role in like local ecosystems building towards equity. So we really do welcome a variety of organizations use this tool if they find it helpful, and also let us know what they think and how, this might be tailored to more of their context. And I do think, I'd say, especially for some of the areas like community engagement and data, I think a lot of those considerations do hold relevant to a variety of localities. And, maybe some of the first fields on the contact information might not relate to, but overall, we hope so. Is the survey primarily to ensure that the resource results reflect an organization's current readiness to implement work, or is it primarily to inform our understanding of where individual organizations are? That's also a great question. It's definitely the former. We're definitely using the survey to make sure that we want to, it's a nice benefit to be able to know where folks are, and that we're definitely going to use that to make the resource better. But we want this to serve as a kind of self-assessment, so you as a member of government can really see where you're at and where you can go. We want that to be the primary value add. And rather than, we didn't want it to be something where you're jumping in through a lot of hoops to get different resources, but instead that, you get something that feels really tailored to your needs. Related to Christina's question, do you imagine one jurisdiction having multiple folks taking the survey? That's something that we've thought about now a lot, because we understand that a lot of teams work differently, right? Like you might be in an agency of one city that has a very different data infrastructure than another team. And so I think we're thinking that this would be maybe team or agency wide, maybe not locality wide, but we really do encourage folks to take it in the way that they see fit. So perhaps if you're looking to build staff capacity and you're the only person in the locality doing that work, maybe it makes more sense to just fill it out based on your own interests and needs. But maybe if your entire team is interested in getting on board, like in the user scenario we suggested, it might make sense to think about your entire team's capacity to do that type of community engagement. So I know that's the answer is basically like both and, but we definitely want it to be a variety of things. Is the survey's purpose to find the right resources as a pre-filter? I don't know all the answers. So we definitely understand that it's possible to skip over, you might not be able to answer something today or even next week. And so we have allowed you to skip some of the questions. It'll just prompt you to answer them, but you can skip through that. So we understand that that's a thing. And, maybe you can answer unsure or NA when that's true. But the survey's purpose, as you asked, is really just to try to get you to the right point. But if you're not sure, we're still going to recommend you resources regardless of how you answer. Even if you answer none of the questions, it'll be maybe a starting point. But we recommend that you do as much as you can just in order to get to the most tailored place that we can give you. But understanding that, like, especially, for example, these data questions, I doubt are easy to answer in like a 5 multiple choice type of situation. Maybe I'll take one more because I know we're a little bit over time. Actually, I think we're in a good spot with answering questions. Most of them seem fairly context specific. So I will turn it over to Olivia, who's going to moderate a panel on the changing landscape of equity at the local level.
Thank you so much, Chitra. It's really great to see this come to life. Hi, everyone. My name is Olivia Soledad, and I'm a Policy Program Associate in Urban's Office of Race and Equity Research, and I'm honored to be moderating this conversation. For this panel, I'll be joined by an esteemed group of equity practitioners, the true experts on this call, all of whom participated in our Navigator user testing phase and offered our team with really invaluable insights. So I invite them to come on camera with me, and I'll introduce you all shortly. Awesome. So joining me today are Dr. Larissa Estes, Executive Director of the California Racial Equity Commission, LaToya Harris, Cultural Engagement Officer for Summit County, Ohio, and Josie Pickens, Chief Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Officer for the City of Philadelphia. So I can honestly spend all 30 minutes just telling you all about how incredible our panelists are, but so we get right to our conversation, I invite you all to read more about their work and background in our speakers' bios document, which we'll put in the chat. So to get started, as we've talked about and heard in the first panel, especially over the last year and in recent months, there's been an intense crackdown against DEI, equity, anti-racism work, and we've seen a lot of jurisdictions roll back equity commitments they made in the wake of the murder of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter protests in 2020. And we even heard from many people joining us in the audience today that they're struggling to operationalize equity or even speak about racial equity. However, as Kathy mentioned earlier too, we're still seeing equity efforts and initiatives seeking to interrupt racial disparities championed at the local level, including those led by all of you and your teams, which really speaks to the resilience of the movement and this work. So to start, I'd love to hear from all of you a little bit more about how you're navigating this landscape and still finding innovative ways to advance equity. What would you recommend to others who are seeking to do the same? So LaToya, how about I start with you?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Olivia. Summit County has 2020, we really looked at ourselves and as a community, and we came together as a community to announce that racism is a public health crisis. And that's very rare for a community in itself. So that gave us a platform that was already agreed upon to take action. In doing so, what we've done externally is really work with our community and work with our partners. We thank institutions like the Urban Institution for bringing us on board and putting the Navigator together just to give smaller entities such as ourselves the ability to look at broader pictures, to be centralized as government, because as government and as public servants, our community looks to us for answers. And with this work never ending, sometimes it's hard to find and locate those answers. So when our community came together to really realize that this is a crisis, we do have to be intentional, we do need to come together and formalize a plan for this. With the support of the Institute, it was easier to start or look for resources to navigate that plan. So we are thankful for that. And that is where we're starting, where we're beginning. And we've started the conversations long before 2020, of course, but everything seems to have come to the forefront now, and it's very intentional work with the support of, again, institutions like yourself, GARE. Beverly talked about some of the resources, and we are moving into a positive place.
Thank you so much, LaToya. We're honored to be partnering with you as well. Josie, do you want to go next?
Hey everyone, I'm happy to be here and thank you for the invitation. I think what's helped us in Philadelphia is the community itself, that this is such a large city, a diverse city, a city where the expectation is that we're going to prioritize racial equity and address racism. I just got a letter, an advocacy letter from a high school student to the mayor, and it was a beautiful letter, and it was kind of the main argument was, what are you going to do to address structural racism? And these are all the ways that structural racism plays out in Philadelphia. And these are all my recommendations. And so I think we're tremendously fortunate to have a city of people who are so connected in how are the things government doing really improving the conditions in my community and in the communities around me. And then I think the second piece that's helped us to survive some of this ebb and flow is that we tried to build out an infrastructure in Philadelphia that wasn't just me and my office, but that really touched kind of everyone in government. So we trained hundreds of department leaders on racial equity, results-based accountability. We started a community of practice. We started publicly releasing reports on our racial equity commitments. We created a dashboard. We created an annual action planning process so that when we got a new mayor in the city, we were able to say, but there are all these things we're committed to that we've already been carrying forward that are ready to roll. And I think that's helped us tremendously because we didn't have to start over with a new mayor and the buy-in was already there.
Thank you so much, Josie. And I'd love to look at that letter. I'm sure there's so much that all of us here can learn from that student. Dr. Estes?
Thank you. And I would say with the state of California, Governor Gavin Newsom issuing Executive Order 1622, which was an equity executive order back in September 2022, was really kind of the big win for the state. And within that executive order, for example, it requires state agencies to embed equity within their strategic plans over the next 3 years. There are elements that are requiring the establishment of data standards around race and equity. And then, of course, the establishment of the California Racial Equity Commission and, cueing into Josie and your comments around developing the structure so that when the next administration comes in, you're able to continue the work and the buy-in is already there. And that's kind of where we see ourselves with the California Racial Equity Commission. The second item that I would just lift up, and Latoya, you talked a little bit about this as well as Josie, is the community. And for us, more explicitly, stakeholder organizations have been long advocating for government to advance racial equity and to develop strategies behind it. And within California, we have a very strong group of stakeholders that have formed a coalition that led to the establishment of the Racial Equity Commission, and they continue to be voices in the room on why this work needs to continue and why it needs to be invested in. And part of what we're doing with the Racial Equity Commission is ensuring that we are having regular conversations with those stakeholder organizations, whether they be as the full coalition or individual organizations, just to continue to understand what they're seeing on the ground and those considerations that we need to have as we develop a racial equity framework for the state, which we anticipate being used not only by state government, but also across local jurisdictions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Estes, and congratulations really to the three of you for the amazing work that you continue to champion in your communities. I'm just amazed every time I hear it. I know some of you touched on this in your answers just now, and it came up in our conversations as well through the user testing of the Navigator, but a challenge that you all talked about wanting to work towards to make sure it doesn't impact the work as much is making sure that there is consistency throughout, whether it be changes in priorities or changes in staffing, since there tends to be a lot of turnover and changes in priorities. And it can be hard when you feel like you're starting from square one. But I know that all of you are finding ways to make sure that that doesn't happen. Can you just speak more about how you bring people into this work, how you foster a shared understanding of racial equity? And this can extend beyond your own teams and colleagues. It can be with external partners as well. And do you think the Navigator and resources like it could help with this effort? And I'll start this time with you, Dr. Estes.
Yeah, I would say it was actually brought up in the first panel, meeting people where they are. And California is a huge state compared to Summit County, Ohio, or the city of Philadelphia. And so some of the things that we're doing within the state of California is we're hosting community meet and greets which are connected into our public meetings of the commission. So the commission itself is a public body, and going to testify or have public comment at a public meeting may be intimidating to some folks, and folks may not have experience of what that really looks like. And so the real purpose of the community meet and greet is to do exactly that: meet people where they are, have really in-depth conversations about what their experiences are, and give them context about the role of the Racial Equity Commission and how we're taking that information that they're sharing and translating that information as to how do we make better decisions as government bodies when it comes to data, when it comes to budget allocations, and then when it comes to how do we better engage community. And while it's on the lower end of the spectrum of community engagement, it's the foundation of building that relationship with community by meeting them where they are. And I think between the two that we've held in Lamont, California, which is in Kern County, and South LA over the last few months, the main thing that we heard from community is we're just happy somebody showed up and wants to hear and listen and be with us. And that's the approach that we take in California, is showing up, being present, and being willing to listen first.
Thank you so much. Josie?
I think the equity tool that you've developed is a great example of what we're trying to do, or what I'm trying to do in Philly, to create these tools that can engage people in a way that other methods might not. So that it's kind of a cool visualization or sound bite, a graphic on LinkedIn, something that grabs you. We've had journalists who will cite to some of the data dashboards that my office has developed, and they don't even talk to us directly. But you read the article and you say, hey, that's our dashboard. So I think creating these different modalities for getting out the information about what we're doing, so that people can be hooked at the level that they have the bandwidth for. They might not be able to read a memo. They might not be able to read a strategic plan. They may not even have time for a long call. But if they see something on social media, if they get forwarded something from our office, if they're reading the paper and they come across a dashboard, that's a way to engage them, and then they'll reach out for follow-up.
Thank you so much, Josie. We certainly hope that the customization aspect of the Navigator makes it as easy as possible to get a snippet of information that can serve as at least a starting point, as Chitler was talking through in the demo. Latoya?
I would just like to say that trying the Navigator and experiencing and doing the assessment, even in the trial state, was eye-opening. And I know, being a public servant and a government employee for decades now, what's important is when we really look at ourselves as government entities, departments, units, sectors, and really be honest up front of our needs and what's going on at the current time, in order to document that and get the resources and really target the help that we need, is very vital and very important. And it was repeated, it's been repeated since we've been on the Zoom, how this was constructed thinking of various capacities, staffing, demographics as far as and capabilities, and really try to encompass all of that. And that's helpful for smaller but still mighty entities and government organizations such as Summit County. We're 14 cities, 8 townships, and 9 villages. But one thing, going through the Navigator and the assessment, we realized that we're good at community engagement. We know that. We're not perfect at it, but we're good. So it was the other different subjects that were listed that we, sought to do entry point in, like diversifying our spend and procurement. We work very closely with our partners, our local chambers, Also, even internally, looking at our policies and procedures, really taking an internal assessment to say, are we even communicating directly or efficiently with our business owners, trying to diversify our spend? I mean, it's easy for us. We speak government a lot. Everybody doesn't translate that well. So we're creating a landing page. We're putting YouTube videos on how to do business in Summit County and with Summit County. And our executive has really committed to engaging in diversifying, our spending in Summit County, and we're trying to lead by example. And again, the navigator and the resources after taking the assessment has helped us move toward that.
Thank you so much, LaToya. I know me and the team are beaming at hearing those comments. And I really want to echo the point that you said and that Chitra brought up earlier, where we hope that the navigator is a collaborative experience, whether it be within your team or across departments. We know that that can be hard since the day-to-day is so fast and there are many things that you all are trying to meet. But having these open conversations about the needs, the goals, the shared vision and understanding is something we hope that this navigator can help support. So I'm really looking forward to hearing feedback from more users as well. For the next question, I mean, I know in the first panel we heard a lot from NLC and GARE about some of the trends that they're seeing, and also how they work to support a lot of their network members. And I just wanted to ask you all, and that stuck to me when Kathy said it in her opening remarks, but how we can help build that second R, the relationships. I mean, Urban will also be doing our part to make sure that we can produce the first R. But how can network organizations really help you all make these connections and facilitate shared learning across cities and connect people to each other? We know your time is so precious, but we know that those connection points can really help you all learn from each other, learn alongside each other, or even just provide support for when things get rough, and also to celebrate the wins, which you all have already spoken of many. So curious to hear what you all think network organizations or organizations like Urban can do to support that shared learning. Josie, how about I start with you this time?
I think events like this one are a great example of how to get us all together to make space for this conversation and shared learning. It's something that you can have on in the background if you're busy with an assignment and still gather information from it. And then I also, to my earlier point about communications and different methods of getting out information, I love just the volume of communications from folks like GARE. I mean, I think that seeing a point of contact from them so often helps me just to remember I'm not alone. There are resources. There's a community. There's things to tap into. And I would not let up on that gas. I think just kind of creating constant and new ways to present what's going on and digestible sound bites and opportunities to jump in is the best way to engage me as a practitioner. And I just want to thank you for providing those resources to us.
Thank you so much, Josie. Larissa or LaToya, do either of you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, just to co-sign Josie, just having access to resources through the navigator or just through the networks that the National League provides and GARE provides is huge. I think it's exciting to know that there's so many people that are doing this work and that we are a community that you can always tap into. And so I'm going to be calling LaToya and Josie. They don't know this now, but now they do, about some of the work that they're doing, because, as much as California is a large state and we're doing a statewide approach, there's so much to be learned on the local level. And that's what spaces like this provide larger states or just states in general, is how can we learn from each other and find ways to scale up, adopt, or adapt things that are already working, things that have shown to create change and create systemic change. And so, I continue to support the work that is coming out of your organizations and making sure that we are also sharing what we're learning on the ground and making sure that those best practices filter into the navigator as well.
Thank you so much, Larissa. I actually, if it's okay, I think I want to start to turn to some of the Q&A questions, and whichever of you would like to answer it, please feel free to chime in. This question came in a little earlier, but I know you all, especially with the first question, talked about how important it is to bring in community, how much you and your teams have done to make sure that you're incorporating lived experience, community feedback whenever possible. I mean, we've gotten a couple of questions that kind of allude to how do you manage those relationships? How do you manage expectations? And how do you set your best foot forward? So just wondering if any of you can speak to that a little bit more.
I'm happy to jump in. I see the engagement that we do with community as power building. And part of the work that we do in terms of setting expectations is to also be transparent on the process and the machine for which we are having to operate in. And being really clear about, we hear you, we understand, we also see those impacts, but we're also having to navigate a system that was not built for communities of color, that is built to push back and say no and to move the goalpost. And part of what we're trying to do in learning with community is to get ahead of that and develop the strategy with community, because it is an inside outside approach. This is not something that government is going to be able to do alone, but it does require the engagement of our partners on the ground, community members, elected officials, to all be on the same page in advancing this work. And so this is power building and advocacy for me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Estes. LaToya?
I want to just, of course, echo what the doctor said, and I will also be reaching out, if she doesn't reach out to me first, to her and Josie. I would just like to really express that it has to be intention. And when you get into this work and you're doing this work and you realize that you've been doing this work without a name, but always advocating for those who have been marginalized, whether they be, internally, externally, community, it is very intentional work, and it doesn't have to be planned to the T like we're used to with government. Government is very precise, and we are policy, we are procedure. This work is constant. It is demanding, like most of our work, but it's a different tone for government sometimes. And it can be applied to what we already have in place, what we're used to, what we know. But we describe it, and I describe it in Summit County, it's like it should be as natural as breathing. That's what this should be. And with partners and opportunities to have that community built around professionals, around government employees and staff and their partners and entities doing their work is vital to the mobility of what we're trying to do. And it's important and appreciated.
Thank you so much, LaToya. I'm gonna hang on to that. It should be as natural as breathing. That's exactly what we all hope to build the muscle for and make sure that we're being intentional at every step. And we at Urban also strive to get better at that every day. I have one final question I'd like to just quickly pose to you all. We've talked a lot about how resources out there, but we know that you may not always have a chance to do an expansive search. So to that end, we just wanted to know, and maybe this is something that all of the urban researchers that are listening to us now can make sure to keep an ear out, but what would be one tool or resource that you'd love to have that you haven't been able to find that could help facilitate your work? Josie, do you want to go first?
I'm at the stage of trying to put together performance measures that are really precise and helpful. And it would just be great to see more visualizations of how we've measured equity across the country and ways that we can develop to get data out to residents when we don't have significant resources to invest in data systems and new technology, ways that we can both get those measures and also get that information out to the public in an accessible way at relatively little cost.
Love it. Dr. Estes?
I would just add the navigation of the legal restraints. I think a lot of people default into when they hear affirmative action or the application of race, people start to freak out and say, well, we can't do that. And that's particularly an issue in California where we've had affirmative action in Proposition 209 for almost for 30 years at this point. So resources on how do you navigate and develop strategies to continue to push racial equity work while the legal landscape is evolving.
Definitely heard that as well. Latoya?
And Kathy touched on this a little bit, but grants, funding, it's always helpful. Any entry point into DEI work, may it be housing, may it be continuous education internally for staff, would be helpful. So just to know that those funding or grant opportunities are accessible and even the capacity to have partnerships to go into securing a grant or something, it would be very helpful.
Thank you so much, Latoya. We'll definitely make sure to do the best that we can to help with that and with all of those examples, but really just wanted to thank the three of you so much for today's conversation and for your continued partnership throughout the creation and launch of the Navigator. We're so grateful for your time, expertise, and passion for this work and look forward to our continued collaborations. Thank you so much. Next, I'd just like to, before we close out, I'd just like to thank my incredible urban colleagues who made this event and the Navigator possible. You heard from some of us today, but there are many, many others who worked on the Navigator and lent their expertise at various points of the development process, including Lee Evans, Sam Atherton, Claire Casella, Jordan Money, Danielle DeRito-Williams, Rob Petingolo, Josh Miller, Dina Tamroff, Dana Ferrante, Christina Baird, Deborah Fox, Haley Romer, Laura Swanson, Jimena Vallejo, Maya Burlow, Sam Pressman. I cannot be more grateful for everyone's partnership throughout. It is because of all of you that the Navigator is live. So please visit the Navigator link, which is in the chat. And lastly, I'd like to thank all of you, our audience, for tuning in today, for your engagement throughout the event, your interest in these topics and the Navigator. We invite you to complete the feedback survey in the chat so we can learn more about your experience today and look forward to hearing about your feedback. Once you take the Navigator survey, go through our resources. We look forward to your continued ideas or suggestions for how we can best support and partner with practitioners seeking to create, implement, or iterate on a number of equity interventions. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us at equityresourcenavigator@urban.org. We hope you'll find the Navigator and its resources useful, actionable, and timely. We look forward to your feedback and to connecting again at future events. Thank you all so much again.